The top of this cornerback class looks like they're going to show out in Indy. It's your defensive preview of the NFL Combine on today's Renner Ranks.
This is Renner Ranks, the ultimate NFL ranking show. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into today's episode of Renner Ranks, your go-to daily rankings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Shout out to those everydayers out there for making Renner Ranks your first listen every day. Don't forget, subscribe, follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. I, of course, am your host, Mike Renner, NFL draft analyst at Mike Renner _ on social media. Today's podcast brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. Offensive preview on the last show. Defensive preview on this show. Again, top performers, guys that need some good numbers at the Combine, guys who, if they don't put up good numbers, I'm not too worried about. And then the day 3 prospects with some tools that should intrigue at the Combine. And I'm just going to warn you right now, day 3 talent on the defensive side of the ball decidedly lacking. Not a lot of names I love in that regard in this class. The only position that really had a number of guys that I think will end up on day 2 that intrigued me was edge rusher. We'll get to those, but for some of these, I was scraping the bottom of the barrel trying to find like a toolsy project to find on day 3. Let's kick it off with the DT class, where the top performer should be none other than Byron Murphy, the top defensive player on my draft board, as we'll get to next week. Top defensive tackle in this draft class. I think he'll be a top 15 pick. But he said he wants to, his goals, 4.8 40. And he's 6'1", 308, mind you. 4.8 40, absurd. 7.23 cone, even stupider. And then 35 bench press reps. If he does those three things, he could be a top 10 pick. I mean, I've mocked him to the Bears a few times. He could even go to the Falcons at number 8. They need DT. I mean, he's Grady Jarrett clone and then some. So I believe he'll be the top performer. I mean, amongst the top performers. I think Chris Jenkins from Michigan should be amongst the top performers as well. Twitched up dude, why I still like him as a top 50 player, even if as a pass rusher still leaves a lot to be desired. Brandon Dorless from Oregon should test really well. Undersized, though, so keep it in context with that. Few guys should test well in this draft class at the DT position. Michael Hall Jr. maybe, Ohio State DT as well, but another undersized guy. Got to keep those in mind when you are looking at the numbers of those 280-pounders. It just is a little different. Now, on some guys who need good numbers. 2 guys I'll highlight specifically. 1, Leonard Taylor from Miami. He's one of the forgotten kind of men in this DT class, a guy who was really high on heading into this year, got banged up, had some injuries, was playing out of position as nose tackle, but he's one of the best pure penetrators, a guy that can get upfield, create disruption, maybe not a play finisher, but definitely a block disruptor on tape at Miami. But when that's the case, so stylistically, if you are a upfield penetrator, if you're a guy who one gaps, you better have juice, right? You better be able to beat offensive linemen to the spot when that's the case. Upfield penetrators that come into the NFL running 5.2 pluses, right? Those guys who are middling athletes, they get eaten alive at the next level. They get more athletic. They get better technique. You better have some twitch to make those offensive linemen miss. So I put him in that boat, and I also put Dwayne Carter from Duke in that boat, and that they better have some plus testing. They better have, because Dwayne Carter, very similar reasons, he is a penetrator. He's a guy who wants to create disruption. He's a guy who wants to get upfield at all costs. Those guys need to put up some numbers to prove to me that they can do so at the next level. If they do, yeah, I think Leonard Taylor is pretty much locked in to a top 100 pick. Dwayne Carter needs some good numbers to get himself into a top 100 pick. Now, the do not worry if they don't test well. Kind of the flip side of that coin. If you are a gap plugger, if you are a two-gapper, if you are that kind of player, I'm not as worried if you don't test well. The kind of things that you need, the lower body strength, the heft, the length. They don't show up as much on combine testing. Think about Derek Brown coming out of Auburn, top 10 pick. Dude ran over 5 seconds in the 40, had an over 8-second 3-cone. Has it really mattered for him? No, because that's not how he wins. When you win with strength, when you win with length, when you win with your hands at DT, those things don't show up in a 40. Now, you'd rather those guys have those things. You'd rather those block eaters do that. But the two that really stick out to me in that mold, T'Vondre Sweat, Texas nose tackle, obviously nose tackles. Going to be difficult for a 360-pounder to test, off the charts. That's what made Jordan Davis, the Georgia DT, such a unicorn. So T'Vondre Sweat, the Texas nose tackle, not too worried if he runs, 5'3". He's a nose tackle. And then Rook Ohoro, the Clemson DT, who I like is one of the best, 3-4 nose tackles, 3-4 defensive ends in this draft class. Guy that can really two-gap over tackles. I'm not worried if they don't put up jaw-dropping numbers. That's not why you're drafting them, where you're drafting them. All right, best day 3 tools in this DT class. I'm going to go with Mason Smith, the LSU defensive tackle, another kind of forgotten guy, underclassman, came out early, not sure why, because his last 2 years have been fairly underwhelming. After his freshman year, I thought this guy was going to be special. You saw his get off at 6'6", 315 as a true freshman. You're like, oh, this guy's going to be something in time. Really never took that next step. He's kind of Gervon Dexter-esque in that regard, the Florida DT who came out last year, who went to the Bears in the second round. I thought he was a little overdrafted. I think Mason Smith's a similar kind of athlete. I think Dexter was maybe a little more explosive. Smith has maybe a little better frame in terms of his length to project to the next level. So I don't think he's going to be a top 100 pick after kind of what he put on tape. His balance was super iffy. And kind of block recognition as well, I had questions about. So Mason Smith didn't have a great third year, still comes out. He's a guy, though, that I would be intrigued with drafting on day 3. Let's get to the edge class, where top performers are they rate themselves, right? You guys have heard these names. Chop Robinson, Penn State. He should be one of the overall combine winners. Guy's another freak. Dallas Turner, Alabama. Expect him to test very, very well across the board. Austin Booker, Kansas. Chalk it up. Think he's going to be a good tester. I think maybe for context-wise, size sort of adjustment, I think Darius Robinson from Missouri should put up good testing. All guys that will be in that top performer mix. Now, some people that need good numbers. I think that Jonah Ellis from Utah is the one guy that just needs good numbers, man. He comes out early. I keep saying these guys that come out early that I'm a little surprised by, but came out early and he's small, man. He's listed at 245, but did not look it. And even at 245, he's not a diced up 245. He was carrying a little bad weight. So 1, how big is he? 2, how long are his arms? Because his length did not look great on tape. And 3, where does he win athletically? Because I liked his lateral agility. I liked his ability to cross the face of opposing offensive tackles this past season. At only 20 years old, 90.1 PFF pass rushing grade, 13 sacks on the year. His dad's a defensive line coach. There's a lot to like about him, but undersized in the NFL, you can win, but you better be a high-end athlete. I like to say you can be undersized, you can be an average athlete, but you can't be both in the NFL. And Ellis, he needs to have good numbers because I don't think he's not coming in. Definitely not coming in good size, shall we say. Guy who will be coming in good size, who I think needs to hit some good numbers, is Braylon Trice from Washington. Because edge is one position where traits are almost non-negotiable. If you don't have them, you better have unbelievable polish and other ways to get the job done. And so Braylon Trice from Washington, good size, 270 plus pounder, but does he have the explosiveness behind him to impose his will on NFL tackles? Because as a senior this past year against college tackles, he beat him up, right? But not a lot of guys beat up the NFL caliber OTs consistently with power without high-end juice behind you. So broad jump numbers, vertical jump numbers, 10 split. He better hit some good figures in all three of those drills if I'm getting on board with him as a top 50 pick, because that's pretty much the only way he wins. He's not bending the edge. He's not a guy who's overtly twitchy. So at the end of the day, he better have some juice behind him. All right. The guy who I am not worried if he doesn't put up great numbers. And again, the edge position, there's a lot of people I would be worried about if they didn't put up great numbers. But Latu is the one where the dude is skilled as I've seen a collegiate prospect. Now, I do think he'll test well in the agility. So whether it's the short shuttle or the 3-cone, I would assume just based off his tape, he's going to crush those. But he may not blaze a 40, may not blaze a 10 split, may not jump super high. I'm not too worried if he doesn't, though. If his change of direction drills are great and the explosives are meh, I'm still going to bat for Latu. I think he's that talented just from a performance perspective. All right. Best day 3 tools in this edge class. I think Javon Solomon, the Troy edge rusher who led the nation in sacks this past year, is one that I pointed to a number of times, but he's more of a DPR, undersized, 6 foot with long arms, can really have some juice off the edge. And then there's like 3 guys that I would say are my kind of favorite, just all around athletes to develop. They are Iyabi Oki Enoma, the Charlotte edge, who's played now, former 5-star, who's played at Alabama, UT Martin, Michigan, and now Charlotte, 24 years old. Guy has a get off that's absurd at his size. Very excited to see how he tests because he's a big boy. He's going to show up in the 250 range at 6'5", and first step on tape looks absurd, but really never figured out how to rush the passer. So I like him. I like Jalex Hunt, the Houston Christian linebacker / edge who was down at the Senior Bowl. I like Javonte Jean-Baptiste, the Notre Dame edge who transferred from Ohio State, who I think should test well. Long NFL edge body, but really never performed at a high enough level to get him into the day 2 mix. So those are probably your best day 3 tools in this edge class. Before we get to linebackers here, today's podcast is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you do if you had an extra hour in your day? A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze the special things into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no reason or no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/lockedon. I think I forgot how to read that last ad read. My Lord, that's on me. All right, let's get to the linebacker class, where top performers are truthfully the guys who are at the top of this class. I expect Peyton Wilson, the NC State linebacker who I've talked about a bunch, to be one of the top performers, could very easily crack 4.5 in the 40. And I expect Edgerrin Cooper, the Texas A&M linebacker, who had a breakout redshirt junior campaign this past fall. A lot of people's LB1 in this class. I expect both those guys to just, should be all around high-end athletes. Linebacker class doesn't have a ton of them, unfortunately, though. Another guy in that mix, Trevin Wallace from Kentucky. Now, I could also throw him in the best day 3 tools. Probably will a little bit later. May go day 3. I think he could sneak into day 2, though. But he is a guy at, just over 6 foot, over 240 pounds, who he can really scoot, man. He tracked down running backs in the one-on-ones pass game drills down at the Senior Bowl. He was running with them easily. So size, speed, explosiveness, he's got it. It's a position that those get drafted highly. That's why I keep saying I think he might go top 100. Now, a guy who I think needs some good numbers in this linebacker class is Tommy Eichenberg, the Ohio State linebacker, who had a big 2022, disappointing 2023, though, in my opinion. His ability to track down running backs in space, I question. And he's not a bad tackler as like a wrap-up, drag-down guy, but just getting to ball carriers in the first place, I had question marks about him. One of the few with, prototypical middle linebacker size, could be a 3-down guy if he tests well. But that's, again, he needs to test well to sort of just prove that, in my mind, that he has that in his game, and that this past year, maybe he was banged up, maybe it was a fluke, and he can be a 3-down guy at the next level. The two linebackers who I'm not worried if they don't test off the charts, who I don't expect to test off the charts, I expect them to test solidly, though, are Junior Colson from Michigan, who's gained a lot of steam, a guy I was hyping up way back in the middle of the fall, saying he's just, dude, solid all-around middle linebacker. It's what the NFL looks like at the position. And it's just a 3-down kind of game that he has. Now, it's not elite by any means in terms of, it doesn't look like what Devin White was coming out. Doesn't look like what your first rounders look like, because pretty much every first rounder, I think outside of Jack Campbell over the past half decade, has run sub 4.6. I don't expect him to run that, but I also don't think he's a poor athlete by any means. The other one, Edifuan Olafosio, kind of just like all the things I said about Colson, I would apply to Olafosio as well. 3-down potential, great size, just not elite athlete by any means. Best day 3 tools in this linebacker class, I will have to go with Tyron Hopper, not to be confused with Tyrone Hopper, his brother, who also plays for Missouri, plays edge though. Tyron Hopper is 6'2", 221, and he can absolutely fly. I think he's in the mix for the top 40 in this linebacker class, just based off his tape. His explosive drill should be off the charts. A little bit of a chicken with his head cut off on tape this past year. I thought his tape was better in 2022 coming into this year than it was in 2023. But at minimum, I think going to a blitz-heavy scheme, he can play a role because he comes downhill with no fear, man. He will hit a running back at full speed, not giving a darn, as Dion says. Very fun player to watch, but also a guy who's a project at the moment with his instincts, ability to read, and consistently be where you want him to be. All right, on to the cornerback class, where I expect top performers. You know the names, pretty much all the top guys. But Quinyon Mitchell, expect him to be the Toledo corner, whether it's bench, vert, 40, off the charts. Nate Wiggins, Clemson corner, freak, high-end, all-around athlete. I think Terrion Arnold should test really well all-around as well. And I'll also throw Cam Hart, the Notre Dame corner. He could be the best size speed corner in this draft class because he's 6'2", over 200 pounds, could run low 4.4s to high 4.3s and jump out the gym. So those are names to watch as your top performers at corner. Now, some guys who I think need good numbers, who I maybe have a little question marks about. No one needs a bigger W at this combine than Kalen King, the Penn State corner. After how down bad he was at the Senior Bowl, get this man a 4.3 40. Can we please? I'm not sure he has it in him, to be honest. Like, that's part of kind of the problem here. But the man needs it. He needs just like something to hang his hat on going into this draft, or else the slip could be real with him. I also think TJ Tampa could use a nice combine. A guy I really haven't talked about much in this cornerback class, but he's one of the best press at the line corners. I like him like press zone schemes because I think he's a good tackler too. But well over 6 foot, long arms, physical. I just don't know if I see like the top 50 sort of twitch in his game. I'd love to be proven wrong, but like kind of that see it, go get it. I just saw a little lethargy compared to, a lot of these high-end corners are good athletes. So I do think if he can prove those wrong, if he can have some good broad vert 40, that guy could be very easily be a top 50 pick, the Iowa State corner, TJ Tampa. The corner who I'm not worried if he doesn't test out I was going to say out the gym, but that doesn't really make any sense. Test off the gym, off the charts, is Kool-Aid McKinstry, the Alabama corner, because I don't expect him to test well, and I'm still high on him. He's, again, kind of if you're not, the guys who are in the don't worry if they're not elite athletes are your most skilled players at said position. And now, again, that's why I go to Latu at edge. That's why I go to McKinstry at corner, even though those are high-end traits positions, right? They are positions where athletes more often than not win. You still get guys who can win as average athletes. They just have to be skilled as all get out. And for my money, Kitchery's about as skilled as any corner in this draft class, with his ability as a tackler, with his ability at the line of scrimmage and press coverage, how he can stick with receivers on their breaks and kind of read where they're going before they get there. Now, the effort concerns are there on tape. I get that. Not a locked in every single play kind of guy. But I think his fall in the draft after kind of his draft hype going into this season, maybe it could be a wake-up call for him. We'll see. I don't know. But I'm not too worried if he goes, 4.52 or something like that. When track record of 4 or 5 plus corners isn't great, I think you could buck that mold. And also some honorable mentions. Don't worry if they're not elite athletes. Slot corners. I don't think it's a position that's nearly as athletically demanding. That's why you see a lot of guys there. But so Mike Sainer still, Michigan slot corner. Tyke Smith, Georgia slot corner. Chris Abrams-Drain, although I think Chris Abrams-Drain will be a nice athlete. The Missouri corner could be a slot. So those guys, don't ding them too hard if they're not great athletes. Best day 3 tools. This was the one position where I was like, all the guys kind of getting rumored on day 3 are either undersized athletes or big and not necessarily athletic. So there's a reason why a lot of these corners are on day 3 this year. It's just a sparse position once you get down the board. But I'll say that DJ James, the Auburn corner, is probably my most intriguing one right now. Now he's only 5'11", 170, so he's skinnier. So again, I said there's no like Tariq Woolen down here who ticks the size, ticks the speed, who's just going to fall late into the draft. I don't think there's one of those guys in this class. But DJ James at 5'11", 170, second fastest guy at the Senior Bowl in terms of GPS speeds. I thought his ability to stop and come back downhill when in man coverage was impressive. The weight shows up, but he is battle tested in the SEC. So there's your best day 3 tools guide corner. Before we get to the safety class here, today's podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, just safeties to go here, where we'll keep it real. Not a lot of great athletes in the safety class. The best athletes, truthfully. So I think just from a pure testing standpoint, the best athletes are probably going to be Jalen Simpson from Auburn and Sione Vaki from Utah. Simpson, though, is in the 170s at safety in terms of weight, almost a non-starter for NFL purposes. And Vaki is under 6 foot with a 6 foot wingspan, which is, again, almost a non-starter for a lot of teams. They just don't want corners with that limited a wingspan. It just makes life difficult as a tackler for you. And to be able to play the catch point where it's necessary to do so. So those aren't going to be everyone's cup of tea from a pure size perspective, but from an all-around test perspective, they should be pretty sweet. Of a guy who ticks maybe every box, I think Jaden Hicks from Washington State, the 6'3", 212-pound safety, could be that guy. I expect him to test well from an explosiveness standpoint. He's a big hitter. Breakout season this year. Went from 18 defensive stops in 2022 to 34 this past fall. So if his testing's good and we see some meh around the safety class, I think he could be the first safety off the board because he's going to be everyone's cup of tea at that size. Everyone could use a safety that can move who's 6'3", 212. Now, a guy who needs some good numbers, I think a lot of guys do in this safety class. But the one I go to is Tyler Nubin, Minnesota safety, because, him versus Jaden Hicks on tape, his tape is better, in my opinion. Now he's older, fifth-year guy, more plays on the football, a little more football IQ on display from Nubin versus Hicks, on tape at least, but less ability to match and mirror, flip the hips, run with someone. I see a little bit of tightness that I worry about, and I just wonder about his range and long speed. So at, a guy who could come in over 6'2", over 210 pounds, great size for the position. I just wonder if he's going to be limited to a box safety at the next level. So I think he needs good numbers. I think Cam Kinchins needs good numbers too. When you're billed as a middle of the field safety with range who can make plays on the football, it's hard to do that in the NFL without real speed. And I think I just from what I saw at the Senior Bowl, I was a little bit more worried after that week of practice about him as an athlete than I was heading into it. So I think both those guys, both in the mix again for the top safety off the board, but both need some good numbers at the combine to do so. Guy who I'm not worried if he doesn't put up good numbers, Javon Bullard, the Georgia safety. I know I talked about how him and Cam Kinchins, Bullard and Kinchins had semi-disappointing Senior Bowls, but Bullard's still a guy who, going back to his tape, he just plays fast. He maximizes every ounce of his athleticism. So he's not going to test with a great frame already. We know that. He came in 5'10", 197 with a 6'2" wingspan at the Senior Bowl. So not ideal traits perspective in that regard, but he's a hitter. He's a great tackler, high football IQ. So if he comes as an average-ish athlete, I think he could still be a quality starting safety for you in the NFL. Now, best day 3 tools, again, another position where I was kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel to find safeties that I liked with their day 3 sort of athleticism. And I'm going to go with Keaton Oladapo, the Oregon State safety, just because he has great size at 6'2", 219, and great ball production. 18 PBUs the last 3 seasons, 3 picks over that span. Now, will he test off the charts? No. I'm not. The guys who I do think will test very well in the safety class that are going to be day 3 guys are tiny, or at least small by NFL standards and undersized. And that's, again, a lot of people don't want that because of the risk it poses adjusting as a tackler to having to tackle ball carriers like Deebo Samuel, Derrick Henry, that you just never faced in college, right? So I'll go with Keaton Oladapo as your best day 3 tools in the safety class. There you have it. Your NFL Combine preview. Obviously, testing starts later this week. Have a few more episodes. We're going to do some Combine look backs at guys at each position. So we're going to go through position by position and find guys who were Combine heroes, who got drafted highly because of it and failed. Some things to learn from them. And then flip side of that, guys who were Combine studs, got drafted late and then turned into stars because of it. And then maybe we'll go through at some point and do the other side, the bad athletes who tested poorly at the combine, ended up turning into good players in the NFL, bad athletes who got drafted highly by the NFL still, who ended up busting, see what we can learn from that. So some combine takeaways is the rest of the week before testing gets started. Then I'm going to be doing some weekend shows for you guys, breaking down the top performers each day throughout the weekend. Looking forward to that. Until next time, you've been listening to Renner Ranks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.